Good morning.
Morning, Rabbi and gentlemen.
Good morning. Good morning, Paul. Okay, so share my screen. Okay, so yesterday, just in passing, we learned something that we had seen before, and also in passing. But this is a principle in Choshen Mishpat that's sort of like a meta principle because you'll see it recurring a number of times. While the halacha is very careful to make sure that a person makes restitution, fair restitution for whatever he damages or whatever he's prepared to damage, the halacha does not permit me to go ahead and damage someone else's property, lechatchila, even when I'm prepared to pay for the cost of the damage, and or to in any way deprive someone of their property or to take risks with someone else's property, even when I'm prepared to cover the loss, obviously without their consent. Now, the reason for that is, and as the Imrei Yaakov had quoted from the Sma, the reason for that is because number one, there's actually two reasons that were brought in the Imrei Yaakov yesterday. Reason number one is because people develop sentimental attachments to their property. So, I mean, think about it when you think for a second. I can't take risks with your dog, with your pet, right? Because you get attached to Smiley or whatever the dog's name is, and but not only a sentimental attachment to a pet, you can have a sentimental attachment to a house, to a car, to your.
Just look into your garage.
What's that?
Just look into your garage. How much stuff you
How much junk? Yeah, that you can't throw away, right? Right. So we become sentimentally attached to our property, and so there's a value that the individual assigns to their property that is not an objective dollar amount, and that's the reason why it's usher for a person to take liberties with another person's property, even when they're prepared to make restitution. So therefore, taking risks and saying that I'm prepared to assume liability for your property, and therefore I'll be able to take risks that halacha doesn't allow for, is not permitted. Okay, so that's reason number one. And reason number two is that even when you are prepared to take full liability, but there's a process of loss, adjudication, assessment, and replacement that's extremely inconvenient, right? I have to go. If you kill Smiley, I've got to go and figure out where to get another dog and find out, make sure it's trained properly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And go to the Beis Din if necessary, or go to court if necessary. It's a big hassle to do all of this whole long process. We all know, we can all relate to that. And that also doesn't have a dollar designation to it. The halacha only requires me to make restitution for the damage that I've caused you, but it doesn't require me to compensate you for all of the time lost from work that you have to go to, and all of the effort that you have to go to, and all the mental energy that you have to go to in order to go about replacing the item that I've caused you to lose. Okay, so I think those are two very important points that we'll see coming up in a number of different contexts. Okay, let's go on to halacha chaf. Ein shorin tit b'rishus harabim lahashhosos sham zman rab. Now, again, this is a medieval halacha, right? You're not allowed to leave mortar or mud out in the public thoroughfare, to leave it there for an extended period of time. Because maybe you'll say to yourself, I have use for this teat, for this mud, or some kind of mortar, which can be used over the course of time as a building material. And, you can many times go to a construction site and they've got all of the construction materials laying out, and sometimes they'll allow some of the construction materials to go onto the sidewalk as well. So you're not allowed to do that because you're intruding on the public property. Aval govlin shamtit litzorach binyan livnot miyad, aval lo la'asot mimenu liveini. But so what you are allowed to do is if you're on a construction site and you temporarily need an area that belongs to the public to mix cement, that you are permitted to do. There is the permission is granted to temporarily use a Rishus Harabim to prepare construction materials. But it cannot be a lengthy and laborious preparation process, such as manufacturing bricks out of mortar. So that you're not allowed to do. But if you, let's say you need to mix some cement and your machinery extends onto the public property, and that you have all the time, you have cement trucks that are sitting on the road, blocking traffic and creating a nuisance. But everyone understands that for a temporary period of time, you need to do what's necessary to get the building up. So permission is granted, and the public tolerates it, like we have at the end of our block on Springgate and Atkinson. It's been going on for months, but we all understand that this is what's necessary in order to put a house together. You're going to need trucks parked on the only thing that I'm concerned about is that if those are allowed as legal parking spaces, it's going to really block up traffic. So I don't know what they're going to do about that. Okay. And anyway, so the Imrei Yaakov explains, he says, but you're not allowed to leave machinery there or apparatus there to make bricks. Because that means that you have to leave the apparatus there for an extended period of time to wait for the bricks to dry. Because what you essentially do is that you find a very level part of, this is before they had pavement and sidewalks or anything. What you would do is you would find a very flat piece of ground. You would take a mold that was hollow on the bottom. You'd pour the cement into the mold, and the ground itself would act as the bottom part of the mold. And you make engraving, or you make grooves in the bricks to mark off. So basically you create this big mold and you put in crisscrossed lattice inside the mold to create the contour of the bricks, and you leave them there to dry. This is a big imposition on the public because it's got to be there for like 24 hours at least before the bricks dry. That's not reasonable to impose on the public, but a temporary imposition on the public is acceptable. So, and that would explain, why we as the public tolerate a building, a construction project, right?
You have to find what's temporary, because you said it take a few months.
Right, but over the course of a few months, you get one truck coming in to mix the cement, and that truck's gone by the end of the day. Then you have another truck coming in to put in the the sewer line or something like that, and that's going to take another day. And there's always a different kind of truck that's coming, but each one of them is temporary. And the projects that we do in construction today are much more elaborate than the construction projects that were done back in the old days. So we make allowances. Now, obviously, up to a point, right? If something becomes completely unreasonable because a guy wants that truck to be there for several days, and it becomes an imposition, that's, common sense dictates that the public has a right to say enough. Okay. Okay, related halacha in Chaf Aleph, we turn the page. Habona, Rishus Harabim. Oh, and by the way, just as a reminder, Barry, whenever you have a chance to find out if you can get more copies of the the Imrei Yaakov, because that might be convenient for people who want to have the text in front of them.
Tell him how many you want to be, he'll go tell you about it.
Okay. Oh, we'd like eight copies. Yes. It's okay. I'll cover it. I'll cover the 8 copies, and whoever wants, and whoever doesn't want, we can slowly sell it off over the course of time.
Is they include us, or
What's that?
is they you're asking for it for us?
Yeah.
Okay, well.
Yeah. They're not cheap. I think they're about what, $60, you said? Yeah. All right. Okay. I know it's a specialty, a special order item. Yeah. Okay. All right. But if anyone has difficulty financially, I'll cover that for you. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. Chaf Aleph. Habona b'rishus harabim. If a person is building out in the public thoroughfare, and I guess what you're doing is you're doing a public works project. Kishemakin ha'avanim asr lahashosan sham. He says when you strike the rocks, I guess when you're breaking up the rocks or you're trying to shape them properly, so you're not allowed to leave the rocks there out in the public. Elamevi ubone miyad. But rather you have to bring them. In other words, let's say you're building a structure that abuts a Rishus Harabim. So clearly you're going to have to be standing in Rishus Harabim while you're doing the construction. But you're not allowed to leave the building materials out in the public, but rather Mevi Ubona Miyad. You have to bring in the rocks to wherever the project is being built, adjacent to the Rishus Harabim, and use them right away. V'asr lizrok avanim odavar acher mirishus l'rishus harabim. And similarly, you're never allowed to throw rocks or any other kind of item out into a rishus harabim from your property, shelo yikashlu bahem rabim, because you don't want the public to stumble or to get damaged from something that you throw out. People would. I just had the thought of people throwing their televisions out the window. Right? So you're not allowed to do that. I don't know why I was thinking about that. There's a movie called Network many years ago. So I don't know why, but people used to do that all the time. They would, garbage they would discard by throwing them out we have the story of the Medrash with Haman and Mordechai, right? With Zeresh, Haman's wife. So remember how she thought that it was Mordechai that was leading the horse. So she takes the bucket that had waste in it, and she pours it out the window, and it lands on her husband's head instead. Okay. Shelo yikashlu bahen rabim. So you're not allowed to discard items and by just throwing them out into rishus harabim, because people will be nechshal, people will stumble, literally stumble. Yes, the chair girl. Yeah. So tell us, what was the chair girl story? Everyone remember that? There was a girl who was
on the 20th floor, whatever, downtown Toronto, and so somebody, I don't know if they dared her or whatever, so she took the chair and she just threw it down below where people were walking around, and so I don't know if somebody saw it or whatever.
She did some cars.
It's a car.
It was on video, was it not?
No,
They filmed it.
They filmed it and then went on video, and then that's what went viral, and then it got its attention. They went after it.
Yeah, they must have thought it was very funny at the time. I'm sure they don't think so anymore. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov Lizrok Avanim. You're not allowed to throw rocks or any other item out into the public. So the Imrei Yaakov says, Kosel Shenafal Rishus Harabim Vehezika, that if a wall collapses into a public area, and it ends up causing damage, imlo bina'a mitchila kiroi umachmazeh nafal hakosel chayiv benizka. So then you have to assess, you have to do a forensic analysis after the wall collapses. Who's responsible for the collapse of the wall? If the collapse happened because of faulty construction, so then the builder is going to be liable. But if it happened because of natural erosion and everything was built according to code and everything was built with the proper materials, and sometimes deterioration occurs despite the best efforts, so then the builder or the owner of the wall is not going to be liable. Okay. Shelo yikashlu bahem rabin. So you have to make sure that the public does not get damaged. So Isa b'shulchan aruch simin taf yud sif aleph, debor hu may avos nazikin. So we're getting into another category of damage called the damage of bore. Bore is one of the chief categories of damage, and the word bore means a pit. So digging a pit in a public area, even though at the time of damage I'm completely passive, but I've created a hazard in a public area, I'm going to be liable for the damage that pit causes. Okay, understandably so. So dichsiv ki achre ish bor, because the Torah says that when a man will dig a pit, shemei achar shechafaro mitchayev b'nizakav, that once I dig the pit, I become liable for any damage that may occur even much later. Kevin sha'asa davar hamazik, zehu mamono shemazik b'makom sha'aso. This, if we wanted to quantify this kind of damage, it's a type of damage where something that I've done or created or my property damages in the place where I place it. In other words, Aish is different. Aish is where I ignite a fire and it travels. But bore is where I place something in an area where it could potentially cause damage. So I've placed something of mine or something that I make or belongs to me, and it ends up damaging. The ha'over alav nizak, and anyone who passes over it is damaged. Lefichach kol hadomalo shehu mamono umunach b'makom umazik havi kibor. And therefore, this creates sort of like the general category that anything that is similar to it, that belongs to me, and is placed in a place where it could cause damage and it ends up causing damage, that's a bore. So therefore, placing anything that could create an impediment to the public falls under the rubric of bore. And that's true, even if let's say I don't put anything solid into the public thoroughfare. I just pour out water onto the public, and someone slips and gets damaged, or an animal slips and gets damaged. So I'm going to be liable. That's especially true in the winter when water can turn to ice. So chafar echad shmoina. That if one person digs a pit that is 8 tfachim deep, and then another person came along and deepened the pit by an additional tefach, both of them will be liable for the damages based upon the depth of the pit that person dug. So that if that pit ends up damaging, you'd have to assess the level of damage that was caused because it was dug 8 tefachim deep, and the level of damage that was caused because of the additional tefach that was dug. Now, naflu kalim bebor v'huzku o nishtabru patur. However, that's only limited to a 9 tefach deep bore, according to the Gemara, does not make you liable for all forms of damage. If, for example, utensils fall into the bore because a guy's walking along and he stumbles and trips on the bore, and his vase that he was carrying falls into the bore and breaks. So then, because the bore was not 10 tfachim deep, it was only 9 tfachim deep, it's the person who dug the pit is going to be patur, is going to be exempt. And this is Xeris HaKasuv Shenamar, V'nafal Shama Shor O Chamor, because the Torah says that if an ox or a donkey falls into the pit, so we learn from there, that's the language of the Torah, Shor V'lo Adam Chamor V'lo Kalim. So that's only when an animal falls into the pit and not utensils. If utensils or a human being fall into a pit and they get damaged, a person is going to be exempt unless the pit was 10 tfachim deep. We'll see. You'll see. He's just really trying to quantify the whole law of bor. V'lo nisma'it adam ela mimisa, aval im huzak bo chayav. So when we say that if I cause the death of an individual, I'm going to be patur, it just means that I'm going to be patur from being liable for committing murder. But I will still be liable for damages caused to a human being for injuring themselves in the pit that I dug. Aval al hakelim patur afilu nafal sham hashor im hakelim umeis hashor v'nishtabru hakelim chayiv al hashor patur al hakelim. But if, let's say, an animal falls into the pit and the utensils break and the animal ends up dying, so the halacha is that I will be liable for the shore, I'll be liable for the animal that fell in and died, but I'm not going to be liable for the kalim that broke. In other words, the damage of bor has some strange limitations that are attached to it by the Torah's language itself. Similarly, if a person falls into a pit and he was carrying something and the thing he was carrying breaks and he gets injured, so the digger of the pit will be liable to compensate for human damage, but he's going to be exempt for paying for the kalim damage, for the damage to the utensils. So again, strange limitations that are not necessarily intuitive, but based on this, im shofech mayim b'rishus harabim, benit nefu bahem kelev shel chavero patur. If a person pours water into a public thoroughfare, person's pouring water into a public thoroughfare, and people become dirty, or the person's utensils rather becomes dirty or damaged in the course of the water causing damage, the person who poured the water is going to be patur if utensils are damaged as a result. Dahavale bor u patur bo es hakelim. Because remember, the Torah gives a specific exemption for damaging utensils with this particular form of source of damage called bor. In other words, there's a special Xeris HaKasuv that when I create a bor in a public area, I'm only liable for damages caused or injuries caused to human beings and to animals, but I'm not going to be liable for injuries or damage caused to inanimate objects. And he says, "V'hu adin tvua ushar dvarim kol she'eno ba'al chai pater." And similarly, if because of the bor that I've created in a rishus harabim, let's say some commodity gets damaged. Let's say a guy is walking and he's holding a bag of wheat or a bag of flour, and he trips because of the impediment that I've placed, or he slips because of the water that was poured, and as a result, he drops the bag, it opens up, spills out all of the flour, and he's out of his bag of flour. So based on this special exemption, you will not have to pay for the cost of the bag of flour. So it doesn't seem to be fair. We have to really examine the basis for this halacha. But that's what turns out to be when you assign the this kind of damage under the category of bore. Now, so this is all, this is all classic Bava Kama halacha. He's quoting the Shulchan Aruch. He's quoting the poskim, and so that's a basic principle having to do with placing an impediment in a public thoroughfare. People or animals that are injured or death, God forbid, as a result of these impediments, a person will be liable for. But damage to utensils, I guess it's considered to be an indirect form of damage because someone must have transported the utensils into the bore or to get damaged, and therefore I, who created the impediment, I'm not doing a direct form of damage, because they had to be transported to the bore in order for the damage to be caused to them. I guess that's the rationale. But an animate being, an animal or a human being that was traveled there themselves and was not expecting that impediment, then I will be liable for if they get injured or worse. Okay, so far so good. And then he says, toldos habor, that some other subcategories or offshoots of the damage of bor is avanos, sakino, umaso, v'chayotze bohen, that let's say I leave a rock or I leave a knife or I leave a mute. Sorry about that for the temporary commercial. Can everybody still hear me? Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Rabbi.
Okay, sorry, we lost internet for just a second there. Okay, so what we were saying is, so I was just reading in the parentheses. He says something very interesting. We talked about chair girl a moment ago, right? Now, is chair girl a classic form of bore? Whether it's above a boulder, is it right for both living and inanimate objects? Okay, this is really weird. I don't know why the internet is fluctuating, but based on anyway, okay. Okay, I think it's a sign that we're going to call it a day. And we're going to wish you all. We're going to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos, and we'll continue the discussion Amir Hashem on Monday.